Grandmaster Yoda, the avatar of the light side of the Force, the antithesis of the dark side, and the counter to Sidious. Was this virtue of what a Jedi Master should be ever tempted by the dark side of the Force? And if so, what was Yoda tempted by? Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. Yoda has actually been tempted by the dark side of the Force before, as the dark side is something that exists within everything and everybody. Even the most virtuous of Jedi such as Plo Koon and Obi-Wan Kenobi had a dark side within them, and there was nothing different about the Jedi Grand Master. In fact, in the lore across canon and legends, we believe that we can turn to 3 distinct moments when Yoda is tempted by the dark side, and when Yoda talks about what tempts him most and calls him most from the dark side and the power that it offers. Over the course of Yoda's 900 years, when the dark side calls to him, what it offers has changed, as Yoda himself has changed, and in these 3 distinct times when the dark side speaks to Yoda, we want to discuss what it offers him, and his greatest pull each of these unique times. The first time Yoda ever truly speaks of the dark side of the Force and what it has to offer is in Yoda Dark Rendezvous. Here, he is meeting with Dooku, and they have a discussion about the light and the dark side of the Force, with Dooku saying that the dark side can offer Yoda great protection, so much in fact that if Yoda embraces the dark side, Dooku believes that he can save all of his friends. They will no longer experience hardship, and the war will eventually end with Yoda's massive power. Dooku says that the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities, and it can ultimately lead to a time of peace that Yoda wants. Yoda looks at Dooku. Normally students would be met with a lecture by Yoda, but Yoda at this point knows that Dooku is too far gone, and therefore attempts a different tactic. He tells the Count that of course he worries about his friends. He tells him that even though he knows the will of the Force is always correct, and that his friends may die in times of conflict and war, that it is still something that weighs heavily on his mind and that a part of Yoda feels responsible for. He knows that he teaches against attachment from other Jedi, but deep down, he cannot help but be saddened by those that transform into the Force itself, especially when he believes that they could have been saved, and saved by his own hand. This is where Dooku thinks that he gains some ground with Yoda, who he then says that if he embraced the dark side, he could be able to stop this. But Yoda says that although he acknowledges that he has this darkness within him, it is important that he turns away from it every chance that he can. Acknowledging that he has a dark side within him is the first step to conquering it. Ignoring it completely would be foolish, and itself would lead to the dark side. It is here where Yoda truly shows his 900 years of age. He doesn't seek power or influence. He simply seeks the protection of his friends, which is his greatest draw. The dark side offers powers that can protect his friends, but yet, Yoda knows that it is not his responsibility, and that the will of the Force dictates how life will flow, not Yoda. It is later on in the Clone Wars when Yoda is directly confronted with his darker half, and in canon we learn that Yoda has made a mistake that he preached to Dooku about, attempting to ignore his darker half completely and not addressing it. The dark vision of Yoda says this: Yoda plays with me not anymore. Yoda thinks me not worthy. Yet you spend your days in the decadence of war, and with that, I grow inside of you. Know your true self. Face me now, or I will devour you. Yoda attempting to push his darkness deeper within himself has caused it to grow and fester. The lie that Yoda has been telling himself is that the war has not had an impact on him and his stance as a Jedi, and yet he knows it deeply and profoundly has changed him. Seeing his friends and the Jedi fall by the hundreds and the thousands has deeply disturbed the Grand Master, but attempting to push this deep within himself and not allow himself to understand this grief and understand why it's important for all of this to happen as the Force wills it has caused the dark side to grow within Yoda. Again telling us that Yoda's greatest draw to the dark side of the Force is his inability to protect those that he loves. The dark side fights Yoda, but Yoda says that the shadow is not a part of himself anymore and rejects it. The more Yoda rejects his shadow, the more he seems to become it. Only when Yoda says that the shadow is indeed a part of himself, but that he would not let it go, does the shadow begin to lose its power. Yoda then vanquishes the dark side within himself. This tells us that Yoda, just like all other beings, does have a dark side and is tempted by it as all are. Yoda's dark side is his inability to stop the war from destroying the Jedi Order, and it is only at the end where he comes to peace with the destruction of the Order and the reformation in the form of Luke that he is finally able to come to peace. But with both of these massively triumphant moments, there is also a third when Yoda is tempted by the dark side, but in a different form. After the events of Order 66, and after Yoda flees to the world of Dagobah, he is surrounded by the dark side of the Force, with Dagobah being a dark side nexus, the cave specifically. The function of the dark side cave on Dagobah is to show one the darker half of themselves, to show them what they fear, and the reality of what will happen if they go down a dark path. This is massively important because in a brand new comic, when Yoda enters the cave on the behest of Obi-Wan, something peculiar happens with him that does not happen with anyone else who has ever entered the cave. It didn't happen in Legends continuity with Starkiller. It didn't happen with Luke Skywalker. It didn't happen with Ben Solo. When Yoda enters the cave, he is not accosted of what will happen if he eventually follows down a dark path. Instead, he is accosted with visions of his past. This tells us that the darkness within Yoda does not lie in his future, or some future choice to embrace it. Yoda is beyond embracing the dark side of the Force, but rather, his war with the dark side is embracing the mistakes that he has made. He is accosted with visions of Anakin, Dooku, and others that he has failed, and it is here where Yoda needs to understand the lesson that he again tells Dooku, that he cannot control the path of others, and that they must make their own choice, with Dooku and Anakin embracing the dark, and Yoda coming to terms with what he cannot control. At the same time though, the Jedi Order has crumbled, and Yoda is the one that shoulders the blame for this destruction, which in some way, it is legitimate. Yet, the Force does not want Yoda to wallow in self-pity in the destruction of the Order and the mistakes of the past. Yoda must come to terms with his past mistakes in order to embrace a lighter future. That future is Luke Skywalker. But Yoda is again tempted by the dark side of the Force. But this time, the dark side communes with Yoda and itself does something rare. The dark side in this moment does something that is very peculiar for it. It does not offer the Grand Master power or a way to right his wrongs. It instead, though, wants him to wallow in his pity. While Yoda was tempted before with his inability to control the world around him and save all of his friends, the dark side now accosts him with visions of what has happened when he is unable to. It is attacking him in a different way, no longer tempting him, but is a direct attack and an offense on his spirit, a realization of Yoda's greatest fears, as Yoda comes to the realization that all of his greatest fears are now the literal reality that he lives in day to day. The Jedi Order has crumbled, his greatest students have died or turned to the dark side of the Force, and he is now hidden away on Dagobah. But it is only when Yoda turns away from the dark side of the Force and embraces the future in Luke and decides to be a teacher yet again, despite all the terrible things that have happened in the past, and despite all the horrific things that have happened in the galaxy, is a new hope truly born. And that, my friends, is what tempts Yoda in the dark side. The dark side tempts all individuals, Jedi, Sith, light, or dark. It is only when we give into it, though, that terrible things happen and we are altered forever. Sometimes the path before us is a challenging one, and it will be easy to embrace the way of power for temporary easement. But in the end, if we stay true to ourselves and the light, it will lead to a brighter future. Thank you so much, my friends, and may the Force be with you.